So after 2 weeks of looking at historical events, some of which were quite painful and all of which were chaotic, we're going to spend this week and next week looking at the things that were being written in the time that all of this stuff was going on. You lose the 2 of the 9 Armenian kingdoms, the 2 that were large enough to matter, and big populations of people are moving around. Armenians are starting to pull themselves into the southern tier, so to speak, of Cilicia, which was not Armenia by any stretch. And so they have to negotiate, how do you be Armenian in some place that's definitely not Armenia? And there's no way you can kind of rationalize it as Armenia. So what are you doing there? Are we ever going home again, kind of thing, as well as on people's minds? Do we really settle? Is this a land of opportunity, or is this, a dire development? And as we're going to see, there will be a lot of different thoughts about that. Now, keep in mind, as we start looking at writers, that to write something down in this time was not an easy thing to do. It's not like us writing on a computer. You can write anything you want. You can write as long as you want. It makes no difference. It's easily done. Or if you're writing with a pen or some other instrument on paper, it's still really easy to do. Even if you have no paper in the house, you can walk down to your local Staples or whatever, or order it on Amazon. You'll have a ream of paper there in no time, and you can proceed to fill it up. None of that was possible in the time period that we're discussing. Paper has only begun moving into the region 150 years before this. Not everybody is on board with it yet. Even if you do decide to write on paper, you still have to create your own ink. You still have to create your own pen. You still have to prepare the paper, which means put lines on it, invisible lines on it, mark out the margins on it. All of that stuff has to be done. And then when you do have your ink, which either you or somebody else has made out of iron filings and maybe the galls off of tree bark, you still have to dip the pen every 2 letters. So it's a laborious process. What would you consider in a time when you are emigrating, a time when you have no idea what the future holds? I mean, we never have any idea what the future holds, but still, in a time like this where everything is disjointed and the structures that you're used to are no longer there, you really have no idea of what's coming up. So what did people consider important enough to take all that trouble, make all that effort to write down? And then when you've written it down, you only have 1 copy. So what things do you think someone else might want to copy? Again, going through the same process. What do you have to say that would be significant enough for that? What matters to you sufficiently for you to do that? So here was the status of things in Armenia at the beginning of the century we're talking about. As you can see, the landscape is somewhat divided up. You have the 3 kind of smaller Armenian kingdoms in purplish colors. Then you have the big Bagratid kingdom in orange. You have the kingdom of Vaspuragan in this kind of peachy color. You have a little Armenian enclave over to the west, parts of Daron. And then you have what's now Artsakh and parts of what today is Azerbaijan out here. So when the kingdom of Vaspuragan's king voluntarily cedes his territory to the Byzantine state, it takes away the whole southern part of Armenia. Now there is nothing there in terms of Armenian government. And as we spoke about, possibly the Katolikos of the day, Katolikos Petros I Kedatarts, King Hovhannes Sumbat Bagratuni, and the very pro-Greek Armenian prince Grigor Magistros, when they decided that it would be best to will the kingdom of the Bagratids to the Greeks as well, to the Byzantine king, for different motives in the case of each of those men. Despite strong resistance on the part of the teenage heir to the throne, Prince Gagik Bagratuni, that whole kingdom fell to the Byzantines as well. And it was a really good prize. The capital city of Ani, the city of 1,000 churches, was a massive settlement, both above and below ground, on a thriving trade route, with a beautiful situation that was naturally defended. The city is to the left of this photo. And additional fortifications added to it in all of its weaker points. Well situated in terms of productive land nearby. You know, if these towers are still standing 1,000 years later, and you can bet the Turks have not done upkeep on them, they were incredible constructions. And we're told that you could drive along the top of the wall. You didn't have to walk, you could take your horse. In fact, you could take a chariot and 2 horses and make your tour of the city walls. So to take this city, the only way to accomplish that was the way it happened, which is to have it given to you from inside. And then, of course, the Byzantines are going to lose it to the Turks in short order. So here you have this devastating loss of massive pieces of territory. And not only so, but following the royal example, which gave up all of the Bagratid kingdom, one of the men who was involved in the deal, Grigor Magistros Pahlavuni, so from the lineage of Gregory the Illuminator, also gave up his property centered on this place called Bujni. Very beautiful enclave with a fort and churches and so on. And quite gorgeous khachkars. So all of this and his extraordinary monastery complex here at Havuts-Tar is all just given to the Byzantines. I don't know if any of you have been to Havuts-Tar. I had a chance to hike out to that a couple of months ago. It's directly across the valley from Garni, for those of you who've been there. And from a distance, the church, what's left of the monastic complex, looks very tiny. But when you get up to it, it's not. There's a huge walled area of living space, fantastic remains of 2 churches. I'm a sucker for winter pictures.
Beautiful.
Some of them are, some of them are not. This is my picture. You can see that it was made in the latest, greatest style with the multicolored stone. Now, if you're going to go to Havuts-Tar, you have to stop in the little village nearby, and or on the way down from Garni, there's a stop. You buy tickets to go there. Please do that, because otherwise you get all the way out to the road to Havuts-Tar, where you still have 3 kilometers to walk, and the guards send you back. Go get your ticket. All right. We went and got our tickets. Mind you, there's no posting anywhere that tells you you need a ticket. So, but boy, is it worth it when you get there. We were the only people there that day. There were 3 of us. And there's a whole secondary set of buildings from a later date. Lots of Grigor Magistros did not put in these decorations, but he would have felt right at home with them. He loved things Islamic as well as Byzantine. Up the hill, there are more chapels and structures, like this little thing. With enough inscriptions on it to keep you busy for days. So all of this kind of thing is given up. All of this is just handed over to the Byzantine government.
Did you say why?
Hmm?
Did you tell us why?
Just to do it. Because we, as we mentioned last time, they went to see the greatest prophet in Armenia, and he predicted the rise to power again of the Byzantines. He was absolutely incorrect. But they figured, you know, if your choice is between handing it over to Islam when you don't want to, or giving it to the Christian Byzantines, that's the better option.
And giving up means just like owing taxes.
It means you turn over the keys and you leave. Yeah.
Means.
Yep. Now, of course, it didn't matter so much about the people who lived on the land, farmers, peasants, that kind of thing. They could stay around if they wanted to, but everybody else is leaving. So there's been a massive change of population, a change of social class, a change of government. It's pretty dislocating. And instead, the Armenians begin moving south towards this area, the far eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea, where you already have populations in place, populations of Greeks, populations of Syriacs, populations of Muslims. And they begin trying to make for themselves enclaves, places where Armenians can gather together, you can grow a population, the population hopefully will flourish, and in fact it did. But you're in the process of starting that, and you're finding in Cilicia some very old Armenian populations, a lot of them actually Chalcedonian, because they've served in the Byzantine military, they've been given land in this area when they retire, and so on and so forth. So you have a mixture of old diasporans there and newcomers, which might sound slightly familiar as a situation. And so here we have this potential, but it's not clear yet whether it will be, new homeland for Armenians. And as people start doing okay in this area, others will join them. It's kind of the Glendale principle. And
These are all fortified cities.
These are all fortifications. Yeah, a lot of them end up being with Armenians. So, for example, Anazarba in the middle becomes one of the strongholds of the Rupenian clan. Sis becomes their capital city. Adana has an Armenian bishop. Marash is run by an Armenian prince. And that will be the case for other places as well shortly. So gradually you have this like popping up of Armenian power centers. And it's not clear yet that there will be some friction between them because of their confessional differences. The older layer of the population, as I said, is mostly Byzantine in its faith. And the newcomers are mostly Lusavor-Chagan. At this moment in time, it doesn't matter, but it will in 100 years later. So what are people writing about? And how many people are writing? This is it for this century. We have the writings of 8 people. As you can see, the first three of them bridge the 10th century into the 11th. And the last two bridge out of the 11th into the beginning of the 12th. So it's not a huge representation for 100 years plus a bit. How many people today are writing in Armenian circles? It's a lot more than this. So these are the people who are thinking thoughts, as far as we know. There may be more of them that have been lost. We have no idea. But these are the people who were thinking thoughts that they felt were worth recording, or that other people asked them to record. Hovhannes Gozern, also known as Hovhannes Daronatsi, the Katoigos Petros Kedatarts, Prince Grigor Magistros, whom we spoke about. We're not going to be actually reading anything of his because most of what he wrote is philosophical. He did translations into Armenian of Plato and Euclid. Because he homeschooled his kids, he wanted the textbooks. So he translated them himself. They didn't already exist. And he wrote some extraordinarily difficult to read letters to his buddy, the Katoigos. They kind of amused each other by seeing if they could write something the other one could not possibly understand. How difficult can I make this for him? So those three people are writing in the transition. Ananias Sanahnetsi, Aristages Lastivertsi are both writing in Armenia, in the homeland. They are among the population that stayed. Kevork Loretsi and Krikor II Pahlavuni, aka Krikor Vagayaser, Krikor the Martyrophile, we spoke about last time, or the time before. And we'll talk about them just a little bit again to give you some more context for those of you who don't recall. Krikor II Pahlavuni is the first Katoigos to actually sit in Cilicia. And Kevork Loretsi was his deraba, his locum tenens. And then the last one is Kevork Mehrik, who lived in both parts of the Armenian population, both in the far north and in Cilicia. And wrote in both places. So he's an interesting character to look at, and he has some odd things to say. So these are our cast of characters. And these writers knew that one of the things they were supposed to do in life was to maintain continuity and stability in people's moral lives, in their faith understanding. And they, like everybody else, had no idea how long the situation would last as it was. They could not foresee that there would be a couple of 100 years of Armenians in Cilicia. And in fact, there would be more than that. There still is, of the Katoigos of Cilicia. So, first among our writers is Hovhannes Gozern of Taron. Widely thought to be the wisest man in Armenia. I don't know how you get that reputation. I would love to know what he was like. I would love to be a fly on the wall when he was conversing with people. People didn't even bother to name him most of the time. They just called him Hayot Vartabed, the teacher of Armenia. And it was his millennial prophecy, his prophecy that the Byzantine Empire would rise again to world dominance. A prophecy that was credible in part because some of his other prophecies actually did come true. This one did not. But he is the one who kicked off that whole train of events that handed the Bagratid kingdom to the Byzantines. He was part of the delegation that actually went to the Emperor Basil II to negotiate the handing over of the king. It was a very hush-hush, very top secret negotiation. This is the area that he's from. Daron is famous for the monastery of St. Garabed of Mush. This is one that was founded by Krikor Lusavoric. We have the story of its foundation. This is what it looked like in the late 1800s, the very early 20th century. St. Garabed of Mush.
Okay.
It's named for John the Baptist, and it was a very misogynistic monastery. No women were allowed to set foot here. No females were allowed to set foot here. And there are quite horrendous stories about what happened if one tried. So this monastery was also called the Monastery of the Nine Fountains in Nadnyan Monastery. Very famous people, including one of Jerusalem's best patriarchs, came from this brotherhood. In 1950, this is what was left of it. So from this to this. This monastery was a huge victim of the genocide. 1980, there's less. It's still recognizable as a building. And today, this is what there is.
Ah,
What was left in the 1980s became a victim of the Turkish-Kurdish wars. I don't know if you remember those. Some of you are probably too young, but there was a long, drawn-out set of battles between Turks and Kurds for the control of Eastern Anatolia. And this monastery was completely devastated at the end of that. You can see the local kids are kind of playing around in what's left of it. All that's left of it effectively is the altar niche. And it's kind of nice that that's the last thing to go, but it's unbelievably sad. So this is kind of where he comes from. And then he spent his last years, his last active years here. Anybody know where this church is? It's one of my favorite ones in Armenia. This is Surp Zoravor Astvadzadzin. It's located in a living area in Yerevan. You kind of have to know which alleyway to go through to get to it. And as you can see, it's all residential around it, but this area used to be a monastery. The church is actually a later addition. The little chapel that you see to the left used to be the center of that monastery. It's the chapel of Saint Anania. And it's still a regular pilgrimage place. People go there all the time. You never see the place as empty as this. This must have been like 5 o'clock in the morning or something. This is the inside of the chapel. And every year for his feast, his arm relic is brought from Echmiadzin for the day and reposes on the altar, and people come and pay their respects. So when you think of what right hands signify, what right arms signify, what's in the reliquary itself may be very small, and it may or may not be part of an arm. There's a piece of bone in there somewhere. This one happens to be Saint Anania, for whom the chapel is named. Armenians have always been very interested in the idea that holiness can actually be physically present in people, and that lasts beyond their death. There's lots of reasons for this, not all of which are religious. So you want to have the right hand of you want someone to be your right hand man.
Yeah.
The right hand of the power of God is where Christ sits. So it's the reliquary shape signifies kind of divine power and the presence of it. And so we use a different relic, the relic of St. Gregory, to stir Muron every few years when it's consecrated, both in Etchmiadzin and in Cilicia. And there are lots and lots of these arm relics. Jerusalem has a whole, almost a room in its treasury just filled with these things. And there are times of the year when they process with many of them. And it's an odd looking thing, but it's kind of nice to think about the right-hand power of all of those people still being available. Hovhannes spent his last years in the monastery that used to surround Saint Anania. And when he passed away, he didn't live to see the outcome of his prophecy and how devastating it actually was for Armenia. He was buried in this chapel in what later became Yerevan's biggest cemetery. Now, this picture is prior to 1930, because in the 1930s, the communist regime completely bulldozed the cemetery to make way for housing construction. And so people who built houses in the 30s and 40s often found, as they dug foundations for their house, the remains of people. It was a little weird. At this moment, part of the chapel that we just saw actually remains inside this house. The people who live in the house have kind of come to terms with the fact that strangers are going to show up at their door and ask to light candles. So part of the chapel remains here in one of their rooms. They built a closet, and the closet is actually framed in part of the doorway of the old chapel. So Yerevan is an interesting place. Hovhannes was well known primarily as, in addition to being a prophet, he was recognized as a scholar of calendarical calculations. So an astronomer and someone who could calculate the movable feasts, which in the Armenian church are many. He also wrote a commentary on Genesis, which I don't think we have. And he wrote a work of spiritual advice, which I didn't think was available, but I found a copy of it yesterday.
Oh.
Somebody published it. So I'm very excited. I did not, of course, between yesterday and today, get to translate it for you, but I will for the next time this class is taught, at least. It's very interesting to see what he thought people should know. And also, at the Catholicos' request, he wrote a history of the Bagratid kings, which is funny since he helped to give their land away. But he found their history worth recording. We have just a few pages of that history in a Madena Taran manuscript. So most of what he wrote is gone. This is just a tiny piece of his commentary on the story of the Transfiguration. All you had is like a half a page. This is just a selection that was in a textbook on Armenian patristics. And it's interesting what he uses this this story as a platform for. Armenians are very careful never to throw out the baby with the bathwater, as they say in English. So people who were condemned by the church in general, Armenians will still read them. In fact, we owe to the Armenians the fact that we have copies of works by various people who the church condemned and got rid of their writings. Armenians still have them. They're like, there's good stuff in there. Why would I burn it? Why would I get rid of it? We have to be discriminating about what you read. You may not take everything, but it's still good to know what other people think. So he uses the Feast of the Transfiguration, and this is interesting, again, considering what he did in terms of his political career. He devotes the Feast of the Transfiguration to a discourse on the one nature in Christ. Wait a minute. Byzantines don't believe that. Byzantines are the two natures in Christ people. So here's a guy who's going to hand over the territory of the Armenians to the Byzantines, doesn't agree with the Byzantines in terms of the central article of their faith. People are funny. Christ is one nature, not like the single nature of God or an angel or the soul, uncombined and simple and undifferentiated. And then he gives a list of heretics, nor is it like Eutyches says, or Marcion or Mani, who said that he took nothing from human nature, so he was purely divine. Nor is it like Apollinaris, who said Christ took flesh incompletely without soul or mind, and so on and so forth. Instead, and this is a nice, clear, succinct statement of the Armenian thought on this, Christ's nature is a completely divine nature and a fully human nature. Its existence is without blemish, entire, and is preserved, indissoluble, through its God-created union. One person, one nature. And that's, if somebody asks you what Armenians believe about the natures of Christ, that's it in a nutshell. So the guy is perfectly clear about his Armenian ideas.
Does that contradict the paragraph before where he says, again, Christ is one nature? And then the next paragraph, he's saying Christ's nature is completely divine and fully human.
And yet it is one person, one nature.
But you have two natures, they're divine and human.
No, he says it is indissolubly together as a God-created union, one person, one nature.
Okay.
Up above, he says, some people say there's no humanity in Christ at all. He's purely divine. He says, no, it's not like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's an exceedingly mysterious thing. And then he gives you an example from your own experience that makes it make sense. The human spirit is one nature, the body is another, but they are joined together by God's creation. One is not changed into the other, nor is either one dissolved, but instead they are preserved whole and united as one person, one nature.
It's beautiful.
So there's that is in a nutshell Armenian Christology. From our lovely friend Hovhannes. Petros Kedatarts, Catholicos Petros I. We're not sure when he was born, sometime in the last third of the 10th century. We do know he died in 1058. He too did not live long enough to see the transition in full swing after the fall of Ani. He was there for the fall of Ani, but he didn't see the Turkish takeover. So he didn't know the full kind of importance of what he had helped to engineer. And in the first week, we spoke about his character and his love of luxury goods and other interesting things about him. Several parts of Petros's very colorful, and we might say checkered life career were spent in Byzantine detention. So it's interesting. On the one hand, the man has been imprisoned more than once by the Byzantine government for taking too firm a stand on Armenian religious positions. And yet, he was part of the group that turned over the kingdom of the Bagratids to the same Byzantines. Very fascinating how we do these things that really are not coincident with one another. So this is one of the places where he did time. And while he was here, he wrote letters, as I just mentioned, to his friend Kricomagistros, but he also wrote hymns. And if you had a chance to read them, you will have noticed that they're hymns having to do usually with death. I'd like to play one of them for you, if this will work for me. It's not in this one. It's one of the funeral hymns. A funeral song that has pieces of the Badarak in it. And when we look at the hymns that I gave you, these are the Hartsk Sharagans for Hankastian Jam. These all have to do, again, with the idea that the ending of every day is like the ending of life. So how do we frame the ending of the day? How do we use the ending of the day as an occasion to think about the end of life? Because after all, one may not wake up in the morning. It's always possible. Someday it will happen. So what's the framework that we want to look at that in? What's the lens we want to view that through? What's the context of our nightly experience? And so for the Aiksa, for the first tone, the first thing that we consider in these hymns that have to do with the possibility of dying or the actuality, the reality of dying. Blessed are you, O Christ, merciful one who rose from the dead. So you start with the affirmation of resurrection. You who are the life of us mortal beings, receive the souls of our departed. Grant repose to those whom you have transferred to the land of the living, which is what Armenians always call the other world. It's the land of the people who are really alive. Bless the Lord and exalt him forever, the one who is coming. And then it's a resurrection verse. He will make alive those who sleep with a forceful blast. And it's the same thing for all of the signs. We praise you, King of glory, is Pensa, is again. By your willing humility, you came down to save those deceived by eating. You who dissolved sin and raised the dead from the depths by your own demise upon the cross and by your descent into the grave. O immortal King, we bless you. You who sat down at the Father's right and invited to you those who confess you, grant that our departed join the ranks of your holy ones. Bless the Lord and exalt him forever. If you go over to Pensa, to the third tone, starts again with the affirmative. You who are King of kings and distributor of life to the human race. Today, through your love for humanity, receive our departed and give them rest with your holy ones. And then on to the resurrection of all humanity. At your terrifying coming in the clouds, you will awaken the dead with the sound of the trump. At that time, with your call that bestows blessing, receive our departed and give them rest with your holy ones. And it's the same pattern in each one of these variants. The affirmation of who Christ is, who God is, the creator and Lord, who loves humanity, who tasted death for our sake, who promised life to those faithful who have died in your name. Now we ask you, judge the souls of our departed with your saints. Kimtsa, the fifth one. We bless you, Father, without beginning, the same affirmation of who Christ is. Give rest to the souls of those who confess your holy name in your kingdom. We praise you, indescribable offspring of the Father, O Son, like the Father without beginning, who endured the death of the cross for our sake. Make those who have died with true faith in you to shine with your holy ones. And the same pattern is repeated again and again. So a person who is incarcerated himself, not knowing what his own fate is going to be, knowing that many people around him have experienced death of many loved ones in the hostilities around the fall of Ani in particular, and in the incursions of the Turkish tribes into Armenian territory, figured that this was the best thing that he could write about, to give people perspective on the daily way that we can affirm who Christ is and frame our own and our loved ones' death within that picture of resurrection. And now we move into Armand's home territory, Anania of Sanahin. We don't know when he lived exactly. People didn't bother to record those things, and they didn't do it with dates in any case. Lives entirely within the 11th century, just from the beginnings of it into the last quarter. And he lived here. Sanahin was a relatively new at that point, state of the art monastic school that would become one of the pentangle, if that means anything to you, pentangle, pentacle, pentagram. If you're into magic, you know pentagrams. Of Armenian intellectual centers that were built on a specific geometric grid as a kind of energy shield that would hold together the spiritual life of Armenians in the homeland who were being divided up among very small principalities, whether they were Armenian or Islamic. So here's the entrance to the Kavit in Sanahin. This is the Kavit on its inside. It's one of the most beautiful spaces ever. This was the classroom in this, one of the classrooms in this monastery. It's called the Hall of Krikor Magistros. We're not quite sure how it was used. It may be that students sat in those niches. It may be that books were held in those niches. We're not 100% sure, but the method of teaching was gemeling, which is why we have gemarans. So you would walk back and forth, the teacher would walk back and forth, students would walk back and forth. It's kind of a Socratic system. And then it has these wonderful arches that remind you of architecture in Ani, because after all, it is a Bagratid building built by the queen for her two sons, who she knew were going to be dividing this area between them because they would not inherit the kingdom, be petty kings, smaller kings, and she wanted them to get along. That. This is what the interior of Sanahin Church used to look like. Now I'm happy to say that I was there a month ago or two, and it's all proper. There's a curtain, there's benches, there's carpets, the whole thing. So it's, oh, hey, Tesfik, nice to see you. Yeah. There's an active community. I was very impressed. It's nice. So here's kind of a depiction of the way that those monasteries are laid out at the points of the, at the points and the intersections. Yeah, so you have a pentagon on the outside, so there's the connection between all of them, but the points of the prayer dome are on the inside. So if you were to pull this thing up by the center point, you would create something like a dome. It's an interesting thought.
This is how the classes are laid out, you said?
This is how the monasteries are laid out. So Sanahin would be one of these. Halbat would be one. Kopayed would be one. And then you have the, actually, I think Goshavank is also one. So Anania is writing primarily commentaries. He also wrote a few short pieces in response to Duapazite teachings, because after all, this area of the country was a mixed population of Armenians and Georgians. Georgians are Chalcedonians. And so there was bound to be questions about their relative beliefs, especially if you have a mixed family or you have, you know, the awkward holiday gathering where you have the Monophysites and the Duaphysites sitting down to a meal together. Something is going to come up. So he wrote some things like that, but his primary writings are a commentary on the epistles of Paul and a commentary on the Gospel of Matthew. And I gave you a section from his commentary on Matthew, the section having to do with the Beatitudes, because that's going to be a theme in several of the writings. Clearly, the Beatitudes are on people's mind. And it's an interesting commentary because up until this point in Armenian literature, commentaries were not like we think of them today. Today, you sit down with a good commentary and it will give you a section on the history. It'll give you a section on cultural stuff. It'll give you notes on etymologies and words and ideas. And then it will go through the book verse by verse or section by section, and it will give you all the information you possibly want from any and every point of view. Armenian tradition was not like that. Again, partly because of the necessity to take, it would take so much money, time, and effort to write something. And also because most things having to do with scripture were being written for either a teacher's students, his advanced students, or his colleagues. And so you would simply note a little piece of the verse, one word, one phrase. It's very seldom an entire verse. The person would be expected, the reader would be expected to be able to recall that entire verse or passage by himself. So you didn't need to write it and waste precious parchment and ink. And then instead of putting down all of the possible ways of looking at that verse or passage, because this person has already been through a long training, he knows all the basic ways to look at it, the author would simply put down a word or a short phrase that would be something new. If you're going to teach this verse, think about this direction. And again, the person reading this commentary was expected to be able to expand that idea on his own. That's a very challenging to our way of looking at things. It's very challenging on many levels. First of all, we do not normally have large chunks of scripture by heart. They did. We do not normally keep in our minds all of the basic approaches to scripture. They did. So you didn't need to have that written down for you. If you needed to have it written down for you, you probably didn't make it out of your study program. Yes, those are the prerequisites for you to get to this point. And so commentaries tended to be very short. By the time you get to Anania of Sanahin, you're writing for a different kind of an audience. This audience needs to be written for more extensively. You also have paper available, which is cheaper than parchment. But I think that that's less of the essence here than the quality of the audience. So he is not writing to an audience of his peers. He is not writing those terse little comments. He's giving you the entire verse, and then he's going into great detail on it in order to lay out for the reader a specific kind of an approach to the passage. So in his approach to the Beatitudes, he does something that's very typically Armenian, which is to assume an underlying spiral structure of time. So for him, the Beatitudes, which are spoken by Christ, are the larger version, the more fulfilled version, the more perfected version of things that have already gone before. So for example, Christ is Adam, and this is perfectly New Testament. Yeah, Christ is the second Adam, but he's also the new Moses. And he's also the new David. So Adam, in a very small way, showed us what Christ would be. Moses, in a much bigger way, depicted Christ. And of course, there are other things he could have called on here. And then David, who is a physical ancestor of Christ, also played a Christ-like function. And so Jesus has to be seen in his teaching as fitting into the paradigm of those things that have gone before. He wants to show his reader that this is where you start. You start looking at Christ as the culmination of something. And so you need to mention the things, the people of which he is the culmination. And there's a second kind of spiral theme that goes through his commentary, and that is the places in which God has spoken, not just spoken, but handed down laws or regulations for how to be in the world. He's also going to show how the Beatitudes fit into the pattern of God's other law givings. So, for example, the Beatitudes in Matthew are cited on a mountain. And when you go to the Galilee, it takes you 2 seconds to realize there are no mountains there. And so you're like, what? We've always heard the Sermon on the Mount. What? There's no mount? What is this about? The Bible is wrong. Yes? No. For this commentator, and for many others, not just him, the idea that the Beatitudes are given on they have to be given on a mountain, and they have to be given in a deserted place, because the law that was given to Moses was in a desert on a mountain. So even if there is no mountain, that teaching is the equivalent of the law that was given on Sinai. It's the new perfected version of the law that was given on Sinai. And so he will speak about why a desert place, why a mountain. He also will bring in imagery from the second time. Well, God gave one regulation to Adam, just one command, that's it. Then to Noah, he gives 6 or 7 commands. So he's going to bring in the flood as well. Then Moses, Mount Sinai, the 10 commandments. And then Jesus on the non-existent mountain, the spiritual mountain, if you like, giving the 9 Beatitudes plus the addenda at the end of the Beatitudes. So in this commentary, he weaves these things together before he actually starts to talk about the Beatitudes themselves. He has several pages of this. And he adds another idea of his own into this, which is that Jesus didn't teach the Beatitudes right out of the box. They were not taught until he had already spent time winning people's confidence and trust by dealing with their physical needs. So he doesn't have Jesus pontificating into a vacuum. You should believe me because I say I'm God. No, it's you should want to hear what I have to say because I have healed lots of people in your neighborhood. So how does God prepare for the giving of laws? And God prepared for the giving of the laws on Sinai by liberating them from Egypt, for example, feeding them in the wilderness. In the case of Noah, God prepared for the regulations that he gave Noah by saving them from the flood. And Jesus prepares people to hear the Beatitudes by saving them from the flood of disease, the flood of harm brought into the world by sin. So it's a very lovely commentary. And then he gets into the question, and this is, again, it's a very Armenian point. He says, when you think about all of the healings that Jesus did prior to the giving of the Beatitudes, prior to the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus never is recorded as having asked anybody, do you believe in me? Then I'll heal you. That comes much later. And Armenians will make a point of saying, you can see this too in that God's grace does not depend on your asking for it. So, for example, in the story of the Good Samaritan, the wounded man has no way of asking. And the Samaritan doesn't sit there and say, well, you know, when you wake up enough to say you believe in me, then I'll do something for you. So Armenians are like, no, grace doesn't work that way. And then he goes into the Beatitudes. Who are the poor in spirit? What kind of mourning is he talking about when he says, blessed are those who mourn? What is the justice that people hunger and thirst for? So it's quite extensive and very clearly laid out, and the rewards are stressed for different types of qualities. And then just as you come to the end of that, you go, well, that was good. And you see on page 5, I think it is, of the text, second interpretation. So he does it all over again. And you're like, wait a minute, why? And as you start reading it, you go, ah, totally different audience.
A little different.
So the first section is written for people who are students of exegetical style and technique. The second section is pure application to everyday life.
The reason he distinguished that is because he wanted to speak with believers and not non-believers.
Yeah. Mhm. That the Beatitudes are applicable to disciples. The Beatitudes are applicable to the people who are going to be with him throughout his ministry. So these are the ground rules. These are the things that you can expect, because you are going to be poor, you are going to be this, you are going to be that.
One's
And
travel.
it's worth it.
Yeah.
So it makes it very different when you read it as if it's applied to everyone in the universe. It's a different matter. If you read it as applied to you as a follower of Christ in his ministry, it takes on a quite different tone. So that's the route that he chooses to go with this. Other people will look at it differently, of course. So there's always in Armenian exegesis, or in Armenian anything actually, there's a range of possibilities for how you can look at something. And as long as it's cogent, it's scripturally based, Armenians will be okay with you thinking it. And if you can find people who want to learn that way from you, okay. The important thing is you are doing your very best to follow scripture, and you are doing your very best to live a Christian life. It's not like there is one way, everything needs to funnel down to one specific point. It's more like things need to funnel up. So things need to open out a bit, because not everyone is the same. And so people's circumstances, personalities, capabilities, and so on will lead them in a range of directions. But as long as they're heading in the same way, and as I said, as long as it's scripturally cogent, Armenians are like, okay. It's the same kind of spirit that meant that they preserved copies of heretical writings, things that the rest of the church judged to be heretical, because there's good stuff in there. You know, use your discretion when you read something. You don't have to burn the whole thing. Just be careful when you read it. Keep your wits about you. So this is one of the interesting texts where you get to see how the same person would look at the same passage for two different types of people. And there's overlap, of course, between the two. But the whole approach is different. He doesn't set up any of the interpretive framework of like spiral time or the completion of what has been already given in the Old Testament. He doesn't do any of that in the second one. The second one is almost straight exhortational literature. So you can envision him giving it to maybe the incoming freshman class of his school, or maybe giving it to a group of people from the village who are interested in doing a Bible study on the Beatitudes. You don't have to burden them with stuff that they won't be interested in or that might confuse them. Just give them the straight stuff. And we're fortunate that Anania's school was one of the top 3 of his time. Sanahnetzi. So Sanahin was a highly respected institution and would maintain Armenia's cultural life for the next several hundred years.
Wow.
So somebody from Sanahin had authority. You didn't get to be a teacher at Sanahin just by walking in the door and saying, hey, I'd like to give a class. You had to be really good. And he raised several generations of students. So times have changed.
Akin to an academic firm now.
Yeah, it was very academic, but also very pastoral. So you had what you wanted to do was to make all of scripture and everything connected with scripture available to people in forms that they could use. And you had to be able to show that you could do that for scholars, you could do that for children, you could do that for your average village person, you could do that for a student at whatever level. That was part of the training. It wasn't just what you know and what's in your head, it's what can you do with what's in your head. Yeah. So him doing multiple interpretations just affirms for us what we already know about their approach. And so when someone graduated from his school of exegesis, or whatever we want to call it, Varta Bedagan school, it was certified that he had the knowledge. And then a group of already serving Vartabeds would get together and see how he did with these things. They would all gather. There would be like a big powwow of Vartabeds, excited to get a new one in their ranks. And they would say, okay, here's the passage. What would you do with this for our incoming class? Here's the passage. What would you do with this for your very best students? Here's the passage. What can you tell us about it? How would you present it to us, your peers and better? How would you preach this if you were preaching in a royal situation? How would you preach this if you were preaching in a parish? And if he did well in all of that, they'd be like, yeah, you're one of us. This is good. Welcome. So the head of whatever school would warn people as they came in. And we'll see later Vanagan Vartabed's warnings to the students in his school. You may go through the entire program and you may be the most brilliant person on the face of the planet. And you may know it all and you may still fail because you don't know how to communicate it. You don't have that empathic connection to people that will allow you to distill everything that you have learned into a form that they can chew on, into a form that will nourish them. Okay, so Aristages is from here. This is the area around Lastiver. It's a fabulous area to hike in. It's also now got some great resorts up here. It's beautiful wherever you look. It's very lush, kind of rolling countryside. The people are friendly. So if you're going to go hiking to Lastiver it's sometimes called Lastiver, sometimes Lastivert. And you can see it's called Anabad Lastiver. So the desert or the monastery of Lastiver, even though the monastery is not still there. And somebody has hung a lovely thing of apples on there in case you're hungry on your hike. Help yourself. And the landscape is incredibly well watered, waterfalls, gorgeous forest. It's a huge vacation area. It also has caves that remind you of Gerard. So these caves have been carved and decorated. Some of the figures are religious, some of them are not.
But they are modern, right?
No, no, no. These are ancient.
Real.
Yep.
Well, you make me want to go back again to Armenia.
Yeah. Me too. And they have things like houses on stilts or tree houses in this area. It's a really interesting location. So Aristages, just before in his old age, wrote a history that recounted mostly things relative to the relationship between Armenians and Byzantines in the time that he had lived. And it's interesting, he calls it a history of the sufferings inflicted on us by the nations around us. So rather overlooking the role that was played in those sufferings by Armenian diplomacy, by figures that he very much admired, like Petros, the Catholicos, and like Hovannes the prophet. He was very approving of them, and yet they were part of the reason why the situation happened. He was also a homilist, a preacher of renown. And so I brought you one of his homilies. I chose this one because it has a section on the Beatitudes embedded in it. As part of his discussion of newness. He wrote this homily for New Sunday, Norgiragi, the first Sunday after Easter. And for an Armenian sermon, it's not that long. It's only 4 single-spaced pages. So it's not meant for a super academic audience. Armenian sermons can be up to 20 pages single-spaced, 30 pages single-spaced. Homilies were the entertainment in town. And so people would come expecting to hear something. And if you preached too short, they would complain. How times have changed. Even in the, I translated the diary of a patriarch of Jerusalem from the 18th century. And he was saying, man, I got to work on my sermon because if I preach less than 3 hours, people are going to be really upset. Armand, you might have been right at home in that time, but not anymore. So the idea of a too short sermon. So here we are. But his homily on New Sunday is very beautiful. When you look at it, you see that it falls into a couple of different sections. And in order to keep it from getting too monotonous, because he does a lot of repetition in it, he'll break it up. He'll do the pattern for a while, and then he'll stop it. He'll break it up. He'll do an explanation, or he'll change track. Then he'll go back to the pattern again. Then he'll break it up again. So you can see these hinge passages in his thinking, in his presentation. It's kind of hypnotic, the first section of this homily. Because it's New Sunday, He wants to talk about newness from every possible point of view. And so he starts out with how appropriate it is that New Sunday falls in the new season of springtime. And then he'll talk about what the personal newness that has been introduced at Easter has to do with us. And you can tell this is a guy who grew up in nature. And he gives you right at the beginning where he's going with it. The feast is new, truly new. And the mysteries herein are splendid. It is new because it marks the start of a new creation. It makes what is past worn out, and it initiates the things that are to come. It is called new because the fruits of the trees are new too. Also new is the cultivation technique of those who work the land. And then he talks about all of these things in nature, the colors, the flavors, the flowers, the savors, the perfumes. It's a very beautiful vocabulary. Translating it was a little bit of a stretch because he has so many words that are related to one another. Talks about the new shoots of corn, the newly born offspring of the flocks and herds, the new activities of their parents, the new work of birds, the new activities of bees. So it's all very much stuff drawn from his physical surroundings. The new paths through the sea that you can now take because it's not winter anymore. New too is the sky's clean appearance. And then he moves over to applying the newness to the church, making the point that everything in nature is new because of the seasons and the way that time cycles. But the church maintains its newness without aging. It has no alteration of hours and change of time. It neither ages nor grows old, but from its age, it is new. In its age, it is new. And he has a little hinge paragraph there on what Christ has done. And then he goes on, likewise, this day pertains to a new time. And then he goes into a series of things on different aspects of time.
Oh, I really like this.
And then finally, he gets to the Beatitudes as the new law. And it's interesting because he has this, everything up till now has been kind of flowing along. And then you get this weird little paragraph that starts, according to Luke's genealogy, counting the generations from Adam to Christ, where the mystery of the daytime of our salvation was depicted. We find the same number there completed from the start of the Lenten pre-fast to this day, so to New Sunday. In other words, everybody is supposed to know, just off the top of their head, and maybe they did, how many days are from the fast of the catechumens to New Sunday. And they're supposed to know how many generations are mentioned in Luke. I didn't know. I had to go look it up. So I confess, I'm not worthy to be in his audience. How many generations are mentioned in the Lucan genealogy? It's totally different from the Matthean genealogy. What do you think? Or you can quickly find out.
Yeah.
Yes. Your little fingers typing.
Well, that's interesting that he assumed his audience knew that, but then he's giving them scriptural verses, like he's telling them where it is in the Bible.
Well, he doesn't tell them where it is, I do.
Oh.
That's me helping you and me out.
Yeah, that was helpful, actually.
You and
like,
me, us pikers who don't know our Bible by heart.
No.
That's lazy, lazy bums.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's just throwing out the verses, and if people pick them up, that's great. If they don't, it doesn't interrupt the flow. But then there's this paragraph. You're supposed to know that there are 77 generations mentioned in the Lucan genealogy. So for him to count those days and say, yep, and there are 77 days involved in this whole process from the pre-fast through the new Sunday. Now, whether that's actually true anymore, I don't know. I would have to go count days on our calendar. But for him, this is a wonderful thing. There are 77 of them. And what is the number 7? He also assumes this is common knowledge.
That's God's number.
And every 7th day is the Lord's day. And so he has that factored in there too. By the same token, this day is the start of a new creation, and it is a Sunday. That is, it is a dominical day. Since the course of all the annual seasons is arranged beginning with it, but it itself is ageless. So then he goes on and talks about the Beatitudes. And how we are effectively at Easter gathered at the grounds of the royal palace in order to enjoy this. He rejoices at our salvation. How much more should we rejoice? Et cetera, et cetera. I'm sorry, the Beatitudes are on the next page. So he does all of this stuff about how extraordinarily beautiful and significant is the number of days here, and then he gets into if it's so wonderful now that we're gathered together at Easter and we're effectively in the presence of the King, then how much better will it be? Here we are poor in spirit. There he will receive us into the kingdom. Here we perform charity for the poor who look to our hands. There in heaven's height, we shall meet with the charitable Christ. So he takes the Beatitudes and then creates a fulfillment of the Beatitudes that it becomes possible because of Easter and the spiritual law of Christ. Now, we don't have enough time left to do the other ones, but I just want to call your attention to 2 things in them. We talked about Grigor Vagayaser, Grigor II, and his sidekick and later enemy, Kevork of Lori. It's really interesting. There are political reasons, obviously, why the 2 of them fell out with each other. But I think the 2 selections that I brought you from them also show something of their comparative character and why they wouldn't ultimately get along. So Grigor the Katoigos is very concerned about how people are living. And so he writes a whole long piece that in the manuscripts gets the complicated title, Counsels of Conduct and Life and Commandments, and a sermon concerning insults and observing Sunday. So it's kind of a grab bag of stuff. But most of it is about not cursing. He's very exercised about that, by which he does not mean what we mean by cursing. He doesn't mean that you occasionally will say, oh, shit. He means that it was a common habit, it still is in Arabic, to actually curse someone in kind of a passing manner. May the Lord destroy your house is a common one. May you eat poison in hell is another one. It's also bled over into Armenian. You know, may your mother be dishonored, etc., etc., etc. And he's really on about that. He's like, you cannot say things like that, even as a joke, to people who are the image of God, to people who are your fellow humans. What do you mean by saying these kinds of things? God would never curse anyone in the manner that we just kind of offhandedly do. So he goes on for pages about this. And all the reasoning for why not. And it gets, he's pretty wrapped around the axle over it, understandably. We don't have anything against it. And he takes off from the verse, anyone who calls his brother a fool is in danger of hellfire. That one of Jesus's sayings. So you have that long thing. And on the other hand, from Kevork Loretzi, the man whom he came to hate, you have this beautiful little tiny piece
How
on
can
the
you?
chalice mixed with water. So
Oh, yeah.
Kevork ended up being a Catholicos, one of the 8 that Krikor was the head of a constellation of Catholicoses. There were 8 of them. And he's talking about a very Byzantine tradition, which is mixing water with wine in the Eucharist. And what he has to say about it is, we don't find that anywhere in Scripture. After all, Jesus said, do this in remembrance of me, not on the cross where you have blood and water, but in the upper room, and so on and so forth. But the conclusion of this, which is not included here, the conclusion of this is, okay, we don't think that's the right way to do it. We don't do it that way. However, the people who do it that way, people who do mix water with their wine, are not intending anything bad by it. We can see where they get their reasoning for it. We don't agree with it, but we can see it. And so maybe we should all just hyper down. And if you're in their church and they put water in their wine, okay. If they come to your church and you don't put water in your wine, they should just shut up about it. Everybody here is offering the same sacrifice to God. And we need to kind of get over ourselves a little bit. And how ours is the only way to do things. And then the last thing I wanted to share with you was from this guy. His name is Kevork Drop of Honey. Kevork Bit of Honey. Who got his name. He signed up for Lake Sevan Monastery when he was 20. Spent a number of years there. You can still see the outline of the monastic complex at his time. And then he went to Tarazar. He went to Cilicia, became one of the founding members of Tarazar Monastery, which became a big location for the royal family in Cilicia. Now it's in terrible condition. It doesn't look so bad from this side, but when you go around to the other one, you can see it's not doing well. Somebody has built their house into the thing. So what he did, and it's worth thinking about what would I have done in his situation, was he wrote a letter to be sent around to all the monasteries that he had connections with when he died. He wrote a letter to them to be read posthumously. In which he takes a stand on one of the issues that was beginning to cause conflict at the time, which is praying for the dead. And he's like, I don't know how you feel about praying for the dead, but I sure want you praying for me. And by the way, while you're at it, think about your own life. If you're having trouble with the idea of praying for the dead, then you better be really good when you're here, because when it's over, you got no hope. Nothing's going to change. So it's a slightly humorous, very sweet kind of letter, as befits. And I think you'll enjoy reading it and maybe thinking about what, if you were in his situation, you might want to write to people to read after you're gone. So
Oh.
next time we'll be looking at writings from the 12th century. Again, seeing what people considered worth the trouble of putting down in readable form, and they were willing to stand behind it and have it passed around. And we'll see what was going on in people's minds.